Good morning, everybody. Today is the last day of that International Conference of Cognitive Consciousness, Cognition and Culture, and this we call a symposium. And we have 5 distinguished colleagues from different Indian traditions, and Chairperson Professor V.V. Srikantan. He was former Director of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Bombay, and in fact he has started research on consciousness studies here in NIAS. So let me welcome all the panelists to come here on the dais, and of course welcome to all the participants here. Professor Srikantan, would you come here? Okay. So our program is given on the flyer, and at first Professor V.V. Srikantan will say something regarding the objectives of the symposium, and then I will introduce our distinguished panelists. After that, we will start discussing the different issues in modern physics and the insights. The name of the symposium is Modern Physics and Ancient Insights on Reality, a Dialogue Across Traditions. So the rule of the game is like, for every issue I will make scientific elaborations. I will take 5 minutes, and there are 5 panelists. They are, it's not mandatory that each panelist will respond to each question. So even if somebody wants to take less time, he can take less time, but average time is 5 minutes. So Professor Srikantan, he will now say about the objectives of the symposium.
Good morning to all of you. Actually, I am not an expert in either philosophy or only I am a physicist, and that too I am an experimental physicist who bothered about various types of radiations coming from outside the Earth. To start with, on cosmic rays, and then high energy astronomy, X-rays, gamma rays, and so on. But somehow I had a fascination for the subject of consciousness from the beginning, and after I retired from KIFR, I came here and then started a small group. That is how this whole thing is going on for the last 22 years at NIAS. I was given a lot of encouragement by Dr. Radharamana, the first director of this institute. He was also a physicist like me, and also an experimental physicist, but he was interested quite a lot in philosophy and also in Buddhism. In fact, he has written some papers on Buddhism. So what I'm going to do now is to give you a broad idea of what the physicist, modern physicists in the 21st century can say. So we are going to talk about, discussing about the question of reality. The first question that comes to our mind is, reality of what? Because we deal with so many things, and every time we look at those things, we feel that there is something behind it. For example, if you see a simple case of a rainbow, we feel that the beautiful colors are there, but what is responsible for this rainbow? It turns out that the rainbow is not just a patch of colors that you see in the sky. It is some water droplets falling and then sunlight falling on the water droplets, giving you the impression of an arch. Now, physicists know why that particular angle comes and why there are two rainbows, one above the other sometimes, and so on. So reality, so many times, is different from appearance. This is very well known, because even Kant has talked about it, how whatever we see, the real thing may be behind, hidden. He has got to kind of correct for all the observations. So the reality we are looking for is essentially the external world and what we call the internal world of thoughts, feelings, sensations, etc. All these are real to us. So what is behind all this is the ultimate question that we would like to answer. What is the ultimate reality? Now, for example, when you look at a flower, you have on the one side, as you can see there, I don't know whether all of you can see it properly, these lights can be switched off. On the one side, you have what a neuroscientist will tell us, and a physicist also, that is the image of the flower falls on the retina, and then you get some electrical pulses, and these go and interact somehow with the cortex, and then you get this feeling of but on the right hand side, if you see there, what this just looking at a flower generates in the mind are very different. It tells you about the color, it tells you about the right hand side, but then it also, so many other associations you immediately get connected. Maybe the first time you saw a beautiful red flower in Chandigarh or someplace, and then it might be some other place. All those things come to your mind. So, appearance and reality are always quite different in any circumstance, as a matter of fact. Now I want to, in fact, what we really are interested in the reality of the universe as a whole. I think we should switch off these lights. See, in that picture there is essentially what is telling you about the universe. The universe as it started with a Big Bang, and at that stage the reality was only a plasma. Immediately after explosion, there was nothing else there. There was no matter, no radiation, nothing. There was energy in some form which we don't know still. And that started the entire mischief. And there was a big explosion, and then it expanded. Then various stages of development of the universe started, and that took something like, as estimated now, 13.6 billion years or so. Now, if you look at it carefully, you find, see, after all, man has come on the stage only some 10,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago. Some people say 50,000 years. But records, some of it is all speculation, some of it is based upon some reasonable evidence. Some people say 50,000 years, some people say 100,000 years. It's only in the last 300 years, that 400 years I should say now, that science has been able to take hold of the situation and come out with a complete map of what happened at what stage of the development of the universe. So if you see there, from the plasma stage, we have come right up to the stage of a human being there, sitting and thinking, pondering over all that has happened before. Now, so you can see, reality there is very different and different reality of the universe. What was there in the universe, plasma, then particles, then all the whole evolutionary stages, and then finally man comes out. There was a period when only fundamental particles were there and nothing else. Today, we not only have so many billions and billions of people, but so many billions and billions of animals, all those things. But it is really a horrifying thought to realize that there was a time when there was nothing. Not one animate object was there in the universe. if we have interpreted all our data properly. So, what we would like to discuss in today's symposium basically is, see, when you look at the universe, you have three different classes you have to take. One is what we call the middle level universe, where the human beings, compared to their size, whatever happens from 10 times more or 100 times more their size, or 1,000 times more. But what science has revealed to us is that is a very trivial portion of the whole universe. Actually, the Earth itself is a very trivial part of the whole scenario. And even this, you see, very negligible compared to what today astronomy has told us about the breadth of the universe, the length of the universe, and then the contents of the universe. And on the other side, with the help of instruments, we have been able to go to extremely small particles, and we started with atoms, ideas of atoms, and then further investigations revealed that there are still smaller things, etc. Finally, if you ask a physicist, he will say all matter consists of what is called according to the standard model, you start with matter and you end up with entities called quarks and leptons. Now, these are exceedingly small. These are smaller than the almost point particles, the quarks, and then electrons are 10 to the power of -8 centimeters. So now we have to, if you want to understand reality, we have to explain everything. On the one side, the small things, on the other side, the large things. So do we have one explanation for everything that we today realize by a variety of experiments? The universe is not that simple. But to complicate it further, you see, this is an example where a particle comes and creates new particles right in front of us. And of course, these particles are recorded in special instruments. One particle comes and then it's not breaking up of anything. It is creation of new particles. And this goes on all the time because of cosmic rays and at accelerators. This is what we are doing. But what is the secret behind it is conversion of the amount of energy that you put in. The energy is converted into the various particles. So that is how the idea came that the universe must have been created out of energy, in some form of energy. And then of course, the question that comes is, so much of energy, from where did it come? We still don't know how so much energy came. But the physicists have a simple trick. What they say is you can always have positive and negative energy. You can start with zero energy, and if you have potential energy, then you can not much energy is required. But this is not very easy to grasp that the entire universe is created out of zero energy and then potential energy, which is negative. Now, to add to all this confusion, there is a new discovery in the last 15 years or so, that this is the detection of the presence of what is called dark energy and dark matter. Now, dark energy is what is bothering the scientists much more than anything else today. Because if you take dark energy and dark matter, that becomes 95% of the energy of the universe. The rest of it, what we all see in the form of stars, galaxies, all the human beings, everything, if you put the energy together, is only 5%. And so far, we don't know what is the nature of the dark energy. What is it that energy-wise is occupying 95% of the universe? This is still a big mystery. And of course, one thinks of the names of Einstein and others in this connection. Einstein, in connection with formulation of the general theory of relativity, had used, at that time, Einstein at the beginning of the last century had not known, and experimentally there was no evidence that the universe was expanding. But to make the things static, so the universe is compact and he introduced a term called lambda in his general theory of relativity. And now people are bringing it back to explain this mystery of dark energy. Of course, this is not accepted by everybody. You know, all I am saying is the experimentally detected results are quite firm, but the theoretical postulations are still in a very bad stage. As a matter of fact, you know, very recently a particle called Higgs boson was discovered, which was necessary from the point of view of theory for explaining many things. But if you see the latest issue of CERN Korea, which always reports everything about the LEP, the collider, they find evidence for another Higgs particle, which is not a boson, but is a lepton. This puts a spanner into the whole scheme of elementary particles. It was not expected, and it's going to create a lot of problems for theory. So, to sum up, I would say that science is discovering a lot of new things about the universe, and a lot of new ideas are there. But at the same time, there are very serious problems with the existing theories, which need to be discussed. Professor Husain Roy, we have selected about 5 points which we can discuss in detail, and we seek the help of our panelists to what clarification they can give from the various other stands point of view on these matters. Thank you very much.
So before starting the dialogue, let me take an opportunity to introduce our distinguished colleagues who have come here for panel discussion. First one, Swami Attopriyananda. He is the Vice Chancellor of Ramakrishna Mission, Vivekananda University, Belur, West Bengal. Swami Attopriyananda received his PhD from University of Madras in theoretical physics and has a number of research publications in reputed international journals. Inspired by Ramakrishna Vivekananda ideology, he joined Ramakrishna Order of Monks in 1978 and was posted at Ramakrishna Mission Vidyamandir, a premier college of Ramakrishna Mission at Belur Math, where he taught physics for nearly 25 years, besides serving as vice principal and principal for 19 years before taking the charge as Vice Chancellor of Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda University in July 2005. Then Professor Narendra Bhandari, he is the Senior Professor Honorary Physical Research Lab, Ahmedabad, and he did his PhD from University of Bombay, again in physics, and worked in Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, worked in various other universities like University of California, and then in his later life he shifted to Physical Research Lab, Ahmedabad, and he has participated in the study of lunar samples of Apollo missions, Soviet lunar missions, and in planning Chandrayaan-1 mission. Apart from publishing many scientific papers in international journals, he also published some articles on modern science and Jain philosophy. He is fellow of Indian National Science Academy and other academies in India. Then Professor Madhu Khanna, she obtained her PhD in Indology studies from University of Oxford, and she was director for the Center of Study of Comparative Religion and Civilization, Jamia Millia University, New Delhi. She is at present visiting professor of Indic religion at the same center, where she teaches interdisciplinary courses in Hindu studies. She has published many books and articles in Tantra, Kashmiri Shaivism, and other in Indian philosophy. Then Geshe Dorji Damdul, he is director of Tibet House, New Delhi. He obtained his Geshe degree from Drepung Lodsaling. Geshe means PhD degree from Depung Lojali Monastic University. He was a visiting fellow at Cambridge University, and he is appointed as official translator to His Holiness Dalai Lama since 2005 for so many years. He is involved in doing written translations of many texts from Tibetan into English as Arya Nagarjun's Mula Madhyamikarika. Professor Ramchandra Ji Bhatt, he is Vice Chancellor in Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusandhan Sansthan, Bangalore, and Director of Veda Vikyanam Gurukulam. Then he did initially he did his PhD in Sanskrit, and he is a Vidwan in Vedanta and Nyaya Darshana. He has been the principal of Gurukul for past 12 years. He firmly believes that the Gurukul system of education is the best to inculcate a good value system in young minds, and also for physical and mental development. He has written 2 papers published in International Journal of Yoga related to the subject. He has also published 6 books and series and related topics. Now we will start our panel discussions. So during panel discussions, it will be discussion among panelists, and after discussing the 5 issues, we will have at least 50 minutes for discussions on the floor. So we have identified 5 issues from modern physics, and the first issue is the origin of the universe, space, time, matter, and quantum vacuum. We take an attempt to answer the questions whether the problem of origin of the world currently evades philosophers and theologians and passes completely to the realm of science, that is physics, astronomy and cosmology, or whether science by itself is not able to solve the problem. In the latter case, one would have to acknowledge the metaphysics, the philosophy of nature and epistemology provides important premises, assumptions and methods indispensable for the solutions. There exist several conceptions regarding the origin of the universe: out of nothing or out of the vacuum. In Christian theology and European philosophy, supernatural conception of creations out of nothing, which refers to God, as well as then Albert Einstein discovered a rigorous framework called general theory of relativity, where the origin and the structure of the universe are discussed in a comprehensive manner. Within the framework of relativistic theory of general theory of relativity, Penrose and Hawking proposed that matter, time, space arise of nothing, and therefore as a beginning of the world and at the same time the beginning of time, St. Augustine's conception. However, since the general theory of relativity cannot suggest any mechanism of transition from the state of nothingness to the state of existence of the universe, the conceptions of creation out of nothing begin to adduce quantum principle. According to the recent formulation of cosmology, that is the origin and structure of the universe is originated from the fluctuations of quantum vacuum. Vacuum in modern physics is supposed to be devoid of any matter but full of activities in the substratum with full energy, where principle of quantum theory is operative. According to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle for energy and time, it is possible to have enormous fluctuation of energy during a very short duration of time, and this fluctuation of energy is due to the fluctuation of quantum vacuum, popularly known as quantum fluctuation, which gives birth to the physical universe. It is worth mentioning that Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is assumed to be valid over all space and time. From philosophical perspective, what is significant is the divisions of creative conceptions into those which assume that the universe arose from nothingness in the strong ontological meaning of the word, and those who is led to the conclusion that it was originated from a certain purer physical reality, namely called quantum vacuum or space-time endowed with fluctuation. In the latter case, that is as per modern cosmology, the universe arises in the process of fluctuation of quantum vacuum, not out of nothing, but out of certain physical reality. The vacuum, or ontologically speaking, a substratum exists which is devoid of any matter, but full of activities or full of potentialities, and these potentialities give rise to various attributes of the physical universe. For example, there exist four fundamental forces in nature: electromagnetic force, gravitational force, strong nuclear force, and weak force, and these fundamental forces are assumed to be corresponding fields like electromagnetic, gravitational, etc. And each field has its distinct characteristics. These characteristics are supposed to have some kind of imprints or seeds in the quantum vacuum. So, these characteristics or attributes arise out of the fluctuation of quantum vacuum and potentialities. Here the scientists are yet to find out the answer how attributes of the physical universe arise out of the fluctuation of quantum vacuum with some seeds or potentialities, or a space-time endowed with fluctuation without having specific attributes of the various fields. It is possible that underlying space-time as a substratum may have large number of dimensions than simply become four-dimensional one. The large number of dimensions, more than 4 dimensions in underlying substratum, may help us to understand the mechanism of various attributes in the physical universe. It immediately raises the challenging issues: why space-time is endowed with 4 dimensions in the manifested universe. Einstein introduced the concept of 4-dimensional world in his specialty of relativity to envisage the observer-independent reality. It is amazing to note that whenever we like to measure or observe, we do in 3-dimensional world of space or 1-dimensional world of time. It is projection of our 4-dimensional world in 3-dimensional one. It is not possible to make any observation in 4-dimensional world. Is it like acting in a higher dimensional world and observation in a lower dimensional world? It is worth mentioning, though several concepts of vacuum like true vacuum, false vacuums are proposed in modern cosmology, yet some of them is nothingness in the strict ontological sense of the word. In the context of these issues, in the creation of the universe out of nothingness, tunneling through nothingness or fluctuation of nothingness are not purely scientific thesis. Not even one does not consider concept of energy, mass, stress tensor and the characteristics of nothingness, but that of space-time we call dynamic geometry, where we should recognize the existence of law of nature at the very beginning, according to which nothingness creates the world. In turn, it assumes the existence of something called the world of logic and mathematics. An explanation of the origin of the universe cannot do without assumption of structure of rationality. In understanding the question of the beginning of the universe, the involvement of the philosophy is inevitable in the following sense. Cosmology, as an empirical science, is entitled on the structure and evolution of small unobservable part of the universe, like correctness of inflation and not the universe as a whole. For example, we are not able to check the correctness of a rule for initial conditions from scientific point of view. It is to be noted that extrapolation of local physics into the whole observable universe do without cosmological principle about which we are basically of a philosophical character. So what are the guiding questions for this kind of issue? Is the emptiness of quantum vacuum similar to emptiness of Buddhist philosophy or Akasha in Vedanta? In Vedantic tradition, the concept of space from Nirguna Brahma, attributes from the attributeless reality, or potentialities and emptiness or Shunyata in Buddhist philosophy may shed some insights in understanding the manifestation of the attributes of the physical universe out of the fluctuation of underlying physical substratum known as quantum vacuum. Is the fluctuation similar to Spando in Kashmiri Shaivism? Now we are inviting our panelists to give their insights from our traditions. Okay, Professor Attapiano. No, Swami Attapiano, you can.
Supposed to be representing the Vedantic tradition, which I very thoroughly do. I was very amused with this number 5. We have in Vedanta and Sankhya, we have Pancha Prana, the 5 pranas, Pancha Karmendriya, Pancha Jnanendriya, Pancha Tanmatras, Pancha Mahabhutas. So we have 5 panelists and 5 questions and 5 minutes given to each of them. It's 5 everywhere, overwhelming 5. So I base myself on the discussion of this question by Swami Vivekananda. I was deeply influenced by his study, which is summarized for the Westerners particularly. The Sankhyan cosmology, the idea of Akasha is something very interesting. So Swami Vivekananda says that the entire universe is composed of 2 materials, one of which is called Akasha. Akasha perhaps is very similar to the ether, the omnipresent ether, the all-penetrating existence. Everything that has a form, all matter resolves into Akasha at the end of the day. And what is the power by which Akasha is manufactured into this universe? And there is another principle which is called prana. Just as Akasha is infinite omnipresent material, this prana is the infinite omnipresent manifesting power. At the beginning and the end of the cycle, everything becomes Akasha, and all the forces that are in the universe resolve back into prana. The next cycle out of this prana is evolved everything that we call energy, everything which we call force. The prana is manifesting as motion. The prana is the gravitation, the magnetism, and even the nerve currents, the motions of the body, the thought force, and so on. The sum total of all the forces in the universe, mental and physical, when resolved back into the original state, is called prana. Swami Vivekananda here quotes from the Nasadiya Sukta, which is one of the earliest attempts of the human mind to understand the mystery of this creation of this universe, the origin of the entire structure which we see. He asks, when there was neither ought nor not, when darkness was covering darkness, what existed then? That Akasha existed without motion. So the theory is, the Akasha existed without motion still, and the prana was existing as energy in the potential state. For some reason which we do not know how, there is a vibration of this prana into Akasha. When prana vibrates in Akasha, then all matter is produced. So this is the theory which the Vedanta posits from the Sankhyan cosmology. And Vivekananda goes on to say, a person has controlled the prana, has controlled the body and all the bodies that exist. And the prana is a generalized manifestation of the force. And the technique of pranayama and yoga, about which our Professor Bhatt will speak in detail, this is the technique by which you can have prana under control. So he concludes by saying that if I can bring myself to a quick vibration of the prana, the higher states of prana, the material of which the whole universe is composed, the ocean of prana, then they differ only in the state of vibration. If I can bring myself to a higher state of vibration, then I'll get to different states of consciousness in which I will look at the universe as emerging from Akasha through the vibration of prana. This higher state of vibration is included in one word in yoga, which we call samadhi. All the states of higher vibration, super conscious vibrations of the mind, are grouped in that one word, samadhi. The lower states of samadhi give us the visions of these beings, and the higher grades of samadhi is when we see the real structure of the universe, the principle behind it, We see the material out of which the whole universe and the world of these grades of beings are composed. As one lump of clay being known, all the other clay in the universe becomes known. So this was the question which is asked in the Upanishads. What is that by knowing which everything can be known? Kasminna bhagavo vigyate sarvamidam vigyatam bhavati iti, which the modern science is now asking through the string theory. The modern science is asking the question, how nature can be so lavish that it has two different sets of rules for the microcosm and the macrocosm. Is it possible to have one particular theory by which the entire universal phenomena can be explained both in the micro level and the macro level? And as you know, this answer to the question is eluding us, and the search for the Holy Grail is still on.
Next panelist.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Namaskar. I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to Professor C.J. Roy and his team, and of course Sangeeta, for inviting me here. It's been a great experience. Well, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the some of the foundational principles of Kashmir Shaivism. And I think many of the words that were used by Professor Srikant form a part of that. But of course the whole structure of understanding the process of cosmogenesis in the Shaiva tradition, Kashmir Shaiva tradition, is a bit different from the way scientists do. So just to locate these texts historically, very briefly, you have the Vedic tradition and then you have the great Agamas. Now the Tantras trace their lineage to the Agamas, and Kashmir Agamas form a very, very important corpus. There are other literary corpus as well. And within Kashmir Shaivism, it's essentially, although it's called Shaivism, but Shakti plays a very important part. And there is one branch of, two or three branches of Kashmir Shaivism where the goddess is revered as the ultimate principle, one being Kubjika, one being Kali, and the other being Tripur Sundari. So within the Kashmir Shaivism corpus, you have, when we talk about Kashmir Shaivism, we really refer to a group of non-dualist Shaiva Shakta Tantras that arose around the 8th or 9th century. And this is essentially a lineage-based tradition. The earliest preceptor was Vasugupta, and of course we all know about the great contribution Abhinav Gupta made in the 11th century, who was a star exegete, commentator, and he wrote the great work Tantra Lok. Now you have the four systems within Kashmir Shaivism. There are four schools. The first, which is not mentioned here, is the earliest, and I'm quoting Professor Sanderson there, Kapalika Kula school, which was essentially an ascetic school. Then you have the Krama, and the Krama school, Krama means succession, gradation, sequential progression of differentiated consciousness. So it really talks about the sequential unfoldment of reality, and this tradition has a very deep mystical flavor. Then you have, of course, the great Spanda system. Spanda is the doctrine of vibration, which is essentially, now Spanda of course means, Spanda is Purana, resonance, sound, thob, or the first thob, or the vibration in the heart of the divine. And this tradition believes in self-recurrent consciousness. According to them, everything is Spanda. The objective world as well as the subjective consciousness is basically a vibration or a collection of vibration. And because they root their understanding of Spanda in unimpeded will of the supreme consciousness, which is vibrating and throbbing and resonating all the time. And that is also referred to as Hridaya, or the heart of the divine. Next slide, please. And of course, then we have the Pratyabhigya tradition, which believes in the doctrine of self-recognition. Now, what is important to understand in this entire debate is the point of view of the Shaivite culture, the Shaiva Advaitwad of Kashmir. Now, the most important concept of this particular school is the ontological presupposition or the axiom is that there is one essence, one universal consciousness known as Chit, and which constitutes the foundational principle that permeates the macro and the micro levels of creation. Now, this single unitive consciousness has a name. You know, it's got both an iconographic name, where you can conceive this consciousness as a god, which is Shiva, and it also has abstract sort of interpretations. So this unitive principle is called Anuttara, the unsurpassable one, Param Shiva, the supreme Shiva, Param Prakasha, the supreme light, Spurana, Sara, I'll just come to that, and also Shiva and Shakti, that is male and female principles, essentially consciousness and energy, if you reduce those principles into different words. Okay, now Prakasha Shiva and the feminine aspect Vimarsha, who is known as cognitive energy, are the ultimate cause of creation, whereas Prakasha is pure awareness, Chit, Samvid. Vimarsha Shakti, his cognitive energy, is the dynamic aspect. His autonomous freedom, Swatantriya, his intentness to create, Unmukta, or potency to create. I was very happy to hear what Shrikantji was talking about, potential and the real state and the manifested state. And they use the word potential in a very big way, and we'll come to that. Now, the Vimarsha Shakti is variously designated. And this takes me into this very interesting observation that in Sanskrit literature we have more words on consciousness than in any other language. So, Vimarsha Shakti is designated as Chit, consciousness, Chaitanya, awareness, Paravak, supreme speech, because they also have a concept of sound, that the world has emanated from sound, the Paravak, Swatantriya, freedom, Aishwarya, lordship, agency, Kartrita, Spurata, radiance of illumination, Sara, essence of phenomena, vibration, Spanda, Urmi, wave of awareness, also known as Hridaya, heart of consciousness, and in iconographic terms, Bhairavi, energy of Bhairav, goddess, Devi, flame, Shikha, and the ground of phenomena, which is described in Yogini Hridaya Deepika as Yogini. So there are so many words. Now, Vimarsha Shakti eternally inheres in Shiva, and the intimate union is one of identity of essence, Samarasya and Tadmatya and Abheda. In other words, you know, they don't contribute to the Sankhya view, where you have two ultimate realities. Now, this shows the various stages of emanation, how this Kashmir Shaivism has viewed it. Ultimate, there is a Shunya, I'll come to that. Then out of Shunya emerges Mahabindu. Now, Mahabindu is really the pre-creative stage of creation. Then there is a Bindu, which is a dimensionless point, which is not perceivable. After Bindu, Bindu represents the seed of the cosmos. Out of the seed comes Visarga, the two Bindus, emission. Visarga means emission, which is emerging out of Unmukta, of the Devi, of Shakti. Then there is the evolution of the cosmic triad, Pramatri, Praman and Prameya, where Shiva cognizes himself sees his own objectivity as coming into fusion. And then there is evolution of Maya Tattva, which is a self-veiling of Shiva, and then the gross categories of creation. Can we just move forward? Yes. So what is Shunya according? There's been a lot of deliberation on the notion of Shunya, and I think we need to understand this, because this is one notion which comes very close to how science views these ideas. Now, Shunya, in the first Shiva Sutra, Vimarshini, it is very well explained. The Atma is neither the body, as the Charvakas believe, nor Prana, as the Vedas believe, nor Buddhi, as the Buddhists believe, nor Shunya, Madhyamika Buddhists believe. It is simply Akasha, as Swamiji was saying, Vyoman, devoid of difference, a partless form of consciousness, a void called Shiva, beyond pramanas. Now that is important. It's beyond pramanas. You can't logically come to it. Incomparable without differentiation, where there is no duality. And that's known as Shiva Vyoma. And this transcends Bhut Akash, Chit Akash. It is Abhava, negation of ultimate end. Next. Now they also have a concept of levels and degrees of Shunya. So you have the ontological Shunya, Shiva as Shunyata, or the abode of the void, the absolute consciousness. As such, it is supportless, of undifferentiated nature, which dissolves the universe into itself and expands all categories of the cosmos. And then you have the notion of fullness and emptiness, but emptiness here is relative. It's integral. Plenitude is described as Chiddghana, dense mass of consciousness. Yeah. Well, if you give me just 2 minutes, I'll finish the creation part and then I'll reduce my time. Okay. Then you also have the notion of microcosmic Shunya, which is a state when a yogi, as Swamiji had just explained so beautifully, experiences the identity with the universe as consciousness. He enters into the expanded state of the great void, Mahashunya. He moves in Chiddakasha, void of consciousness, free and effortlessly. And so, and in this state, the yogi is described as one who has devoured time, Kalgras Rasika. So in other words, you know, this is interesting that when they talk of Shunya, they're not talking just of one type of Shunya. Now this shows the progression. So you have, I won't go into the details of it because it's pretty complex. So the first is Shunya, which is total void, appearance where the universe in unmanifested state, which is self-contained universal I of Shiva. It's a germinal state, which is indicated in blue. And it is really zero energy, if I can use a scientific term. Now as we come down in the path of descent, we come to the notion of Shiva splitting, Shiva's energy engaging itself with the potential power Shiva, and there is emanation of two bindus, white representing the male and the red representing the female. And out of this, now these are states beyond dimension. This is the fourth dimension, because this is the meta-dynamics of Mahabindu, which is beyond the dimensionless point. So this is happening in some vacuum or space. It's purely an abstraction. And what is happening in that space is that these three elements that you see, the three bindus in the circle, it's part of Shunya. Now what are those concepts which are appearing there? It's the expanded version of Mahabindu, illustrating the modifications of original unity as manifested in the self-contained universal I consciousness of Shiva. So here you have both of them together but in potential state, and then after that we have the emergence of the actual dimension of the Mahabindu, which appears in the triangle. Okay, next. So the next stage of cosmic evolution is the triangle, and I think in the first lecture, which was given by an eminent scientist, I think something of this nature was talked about, that ultimately all our cognition is rounded up by triangles. Okay, now I just want to show, I won't go into this is complex. I just want to show you the diagram which kind of explains what creation is. Yeah, this gives you an overview of how creation is in three phases. First is pure creation, then the psychical tattvas which bring in individuality, and the physical tattvas which also Honorable Swamiji was mentioning, which are the same tattvas as the tattvas which are attributed by the Sankhya system. So broadly, this is the creation theory put forward by Kashmir Shaivism. Okay. Sorry for taking so much time.
We are listening Shunyata and Akasha, so maybe my personal liking, I will ask Geshe Dorji Damdul from Buddhist point of view.
Thank you very much for giving this platform to all the organizers. Let me make it very simple. While there are very complicated concepts involved, I'll make it all very simple. At the same time, that those of you who are interested to go for the resources, as to track the resources, I'll be so happy to provide you later on, to make it very simple for all the people here, the audience here. First, in the canonical text, there's a mention of what is known as the whole cosmic evolution of four phases. One is the vacuum state, then the formation state, then the abiding state, and the dissolution state. So these are the four phases that we need to keep in mind. Vacuum state, formation state, abiding state, and the dissolution state. Dissolution or destruction. So at the moment, the universe is going through the abiding state. At the same time, keep in mind that when I say these four phases, it is not confined to the entire universe. That's not true. In the Buddhist context, there's what is known as the whole universe is something which we cannot really comprehend fully. So there is what we call as, say, for example, galaxy in simple terms. In the modern physics, what is known as the galaxies. Like that, the universe is divided into smaller factions. So one of which could be at a phase of one of the four phases, say the formation phase, and then other part of the universe could be in the destruction phase. Still others could be in the vacuum phase, and others in the abiding phase. So overall speaking, net is just the same. Overall speaking, it is like just say there's some waves going up, some waves going down, and overall speaking, it's just zero. It's not zero. It is everything there, but then we have to confine when we speak of the evolution of the universe, it's not that the whole universe as such, but a smaller fraction of the universe, say the universe which is visible to our eyes at this moment, visible to the science. So there's these four phases. At the moment, in the case of the universe at which we live in, we are in the phase of the abiding phase, which means that we flourish, then human beings are formed, all these things. So then this is preceded by the formation. This experience of the abiding of the universe is preceded by the formation of the universe, evolution, formation. So this formation of the universe, if we try to look at the Big Bang theory, it is very much in line with that. Big Bang, say initially the singularity is simply burst, it exploded, and then slowly it further, say for example, it burst into so many small fractions, and the solar system is one of them. Solar system. And the solar system in a sense is the sun, our sun. And the sun also burst and it got into 9 pieces or 8 pieces. So which makes the planets. So then slowly it cooled down, everything cooled down, and then everything started, the life and everything started. So that is the formation phase. Then the very interesting question is, if it is exactly in line with the Big Bang theory, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, his insight or his style of embracing any philosophy, any concept, is very skeptical and at the same time very rational. So he would argue that, say, while there are different versions of the universe, evolution of the universe, there's versions within Buddhism, and of course other traditions also. His Holiness, one of which says that there's a Mount Meru in the center, and the 4 continents on the side. And His Holiness says that this is a disaster. This concept, although it may be said in the one section of the Buddhist philosophy, it is disaster. It totally goes against the empirical reality, which is observable reality. If the Mount Meru if the Mount Meru exists, why not its shadow be seen? The fact that its shadow is not seen, and the fact that now we see the truth of the solar system with sun in the center, then the 9 planets or the 8 planets. So from there we could very clearly say that this part, although it is said in the Buddhist literature, but this is not true. We don't have to accept things blindly. Which contradicts the reality, we have to abandon that. So this is the courage of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So in this spirit, then the question arises, if we are in the state of the abiding of the universe which we experience, then the formation is, we can go back to the quantum Big Bang theory, Big Bang time. So now, how the Big Bang came into being, this is the question. This singularity, how this exploded, this is the question. This comes into being. So this explosion, it comes into being. The question is whether a single Big Bang or a multiple Big Bang. This is another question. This is even a heated debate amongst the physicists. So Buddhism accepts the multiple Big Bang because for a single Big Bang, then the question is asked by Stephen Hawking himself. How does this intense energy, the singularity, how does it know that I have intense energy, I cannot bear any more? How does the energy know that? Without it knowing it, how can it explode it? So why, in the first place, why should it explode? Even if there's tremendous energy, what cannot contain it? This is all the questions which remains unsolved by the physicists. So now, this, from Buddhist point of view, there's always what is known as, National Institute of Advanced Studies. The Tata. So his vision, I should really support education system of India. I should really support the high standard of education in India. So National Institute of Advanced Studies should come into being. And maybe they are the collaborators, they were supporters, they were the brains with him. These ideas, they are the intention. This intention was responsible for making this huge, massive structure, a very beautiful, massive structure come into being. So now this energy, how this singularity, it comes to do this great explosion is determined by the intention. Now what intention? Don't take it abstractly. Intention of the beings, not as a universal cosmic being. No. We are the individual beings. Say, if I'm hungry, if I'm sick, then all others are happy, then I have to go to hospital myself. This is my individual being, that's it. So therefore, there's, at the same time, there's what is known as the collective motivation, collective intention, meaning that all these individual beings, they come together, they decided, okay, let's have NIAS. So this is not a cosmic like this, but the individual beings, they come together, they came up with the idea that let's have this issue, this is so important. I really support you, Mr. Tata. And then everybody came into being. So this is known as the collective. It's not one which joins all the cosmos, the consciousness or the intention. Individual intentions, they come in unanimity, they come in consensus, they come together, then this is known as the collective intention. Likewise, all those beings who are to partake in this, partake this solar system, planet Earth, and partake, say, the Milky Way galaxy. How many of such solar systems there? Even the science cannot explore at this moment. So, according to the Buddhist text, as I mentioned, that this solar system is not just confined to one small solar system. It is just numerously there in this same Milky Way galaxy. So all these beings, their intention collectively created as the intention to explode this the singularity, and which is responsible for creating this the universe. Then the next question. So if it just started by this singularity, what is that material like? So in Buddhist Shri Kalachakra Tantra, there is what is known as space particles. Space particles. In fact, a world-renowned physicist, David Finkelstein, during one of my meetings with him, he was asking me, there's a very interesting topic known as space particle in the Buddhist, the cosmology. So what is that like? So he was so interested in it. So that part would be very interesting as to what triggers or what is the basic material for this singularity from Buddhist point of view. And there are many other things. I'll stop here due to constraints of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll listen Professor Bhandari from Jain perspective.
So the questions which Dr. Shishir Roy has formed are very profound, and I would like to present the Jaina view of what is the answer to these questions. But before I go into it, it is important to see what is the Jaina framework within which we can answer these questions. You see, Jainism has a well-developed structure and theory and framework. So I'll bring out first a few points before we come to the question of origin of the universe. The first thing Jainism propounds is that all questions cannot be answered in yes and no. So it can be yes or it can be no, it can be either or it can be neither, or it can be indescribable. So there are 7 possibilities, and Mahavira, who introduced this concept of Syadvad some 2600 years ago, told his monks that now you have taken a vow to tell the truth, so please to every answer attach a contextuality, because no answer is complete and no answer is correct unless it is given in the proper context. So here I see a lot of everybody is interested in searching the ultimate truth. So we should always mention the context. That is what Jainism says. The second point is perspectivism. The perspective, the frame of mind with which you see a thing. So everything is partially correct only, not completely true, depends on the perspective with which this is being the answer is being given. Now the main point is that every substance, everything has 2 aspects according to Jainism. One is the substantial aspect and one is the mode. The substantial aspect is eternal. Eternal means it is not created nor it is destroyed, but it goes through a change. And the mode is one which is created, which is changing, which is persistent through change, and which is destroyed. And the example is the body. You see, all the cells are being created and die every minute, but some substance remains. So when we talk of anything, we should see from substantial point of view and from the modal point of view. The mode will be created, will be persistent, will be destroyed, whereas the substance is eternal and continues as it is. Now Jainism, the Jain philosophy strongly believes in law of conservation. So it does not agree with many of the ideas given here that you can create something out of nothing. That is impossible. In the very beginning, when they gave a lot of thought to cosmology, they said that everything is conserved, and they have proposed 6 substances which are essence. You know, I told that everything has a substance and a mode. So anything x is equal to s plus m. Now what is the substance? If you analyze it, then ultimately you will find 6 substances out of which everything is made. One is of course Akasha, but that Akasha is not the one out of which the universe is made. It is only a void which gives you place to exist. The other is Parmanu, that is out of which the whole material universe, the physical universe is made. The third is this Atman, or the soul or Jiva, out of which the life forms are made. So you cannot have materialistic origin of life. The Jainism is strictly against it, and you cannot produce one from the other, so you cannot produce matter from soul or soul from matter. And then there are two other substances. One is called dharmastikai and other is called adharmastikai. Now, these are supposed to be agents of motion and rest. We'll come to it later on. And then the last one is time. But time, whether it is substance or not, there are multiple views, and we'll discuss when the question of time comes. So finally, the universe will boil down to these six substances and time. The other important point to remember about Jainism is that, science believes that there is something known about a thing and something unknown, and as we study, the unknown is converted into known, and eventually, as scientists, we hope that everything will be known. But the Jainism is quite different in its concept. It says there is something known, something unknown, and something unknowable by sensory organs. Because they believe that sensory organs and mind are imperfect. They are always under training. You can train them, you can have a better mind, better equipped mind, or science comes under this because it is an instrument of mind. So you cannot know everything by sensory organs or by mind or by science. So there is a thing which is indescribable, which can only be experienced. So these are few points I thought I'll first bring them out before we come to the main question of how the universe originated. So for one thing, different from some other schools think, they believe that the universe is real. It is not a maya, or it is not an illusion, or it is not something which is just apparent. It is real, and the Jain universe is actually a multiverse, or you can say it is a triverse made of three kind of universes. One in which we live, the Manushya Lok, the heaven and the hell, and it is always in triplets. And there may be many such triplets as such, and there is a structure and all that, but everything in the universe is conserved. All these six substances, I said, are conserved. So there is, I was thinking when this proposal of Shunyavad, and in Buddhism it is given a lot of importance, how you can create the physical universe out of nothing. So the only way, because everything is not written in the language we are accustomed to, so you can always have the freedom of interpretation. So when you come to Parmanu, out of which the whole universe is made, so what is Parmanu? They have discussed at length about Parmanu, about its velocity, about its vibrations, about its motion, but two things are relevant here. One is that Parmanu is massless, and the other is that Parmanu has no dimensions. So that can be a concept of Shunya, that it is nothing actually. It has no mass, it has no size. At the same time, it is mentioned that one Parmanu can occupy 1 unit of space. You see, they believe in a unit space they call Pradesha, a unit time they call Kalanu, and a unit matter they call Parmanu. So 1 to infinite Parmanus can be accommodated in a unit space. It is like bosons, as we know in physics. So Parmanu is nothing but a boson. Of course, this concept is there since beginning. So the only way you can produce the universe is out of Parmanu, and Parmanu is actually nothing because it is no dimension and no mass. So now now universe has a substantial existence, a substance, and a mode. According to Jainism, universe is changing every instant. You do anything, you put one stone from one place to another, the state of universe has changed. So it is changing, that x is equal to s plus m. The mode is changing every minute, but s is something which persists. So what I would like to say is that I don't know how we can make out of quantum vacuum. The only possibility is if quantum vacuum is the substrate out of which the universe is formed and dissolves again, then it will be eternal. You can form the universe and dissolve it, and that is the only way it can be accommodated. So I would like to say that the Jaina universe require these 6 substances. Each one is eternal. It is more or less sometimes likened to steady state theory. It is eternal. It cannot be destroyed. It persists through. It will exist for all time. And I just try to give you some way in which it can be produced from Parmanu, which can be equated to Shunya, or it can be it is a multiverse which can be, which can be created and destroyed, but some planum or some substrate continues to exist forever.
Okay, thank you. Let us now listen the overview by Professor Ramchandra ji.
अनवच्छिन्न अनंत चिन्मात्र मूर्तये स्वानुभूत्येकमानाय नमः शांताय तेजसे दिक्कालाद्यनवच्छिन्न अनंत चिन्मात्र मूर्तये स्वानुभूत्येकमानाय नमः शांताय तेजसे. My basic concept about yoga, it is purely spiritually rooted. It is not so-called popular yoga as it is popularly defined and projected. When we take up a very important subject domain as cosmology, there are many schools of thoughts apparently talking in different tones and tunes, but they address one important thing, which is the root for this appearing world, that is supraclinical consciousness. Consciousness, where all those schools of thoughts, whether it is Veda-based, Upanishad-based or non-based, all they have this very comprehensive concept about cosmology. All those different schools of thoughts have the same question to address: Kuta ajata, kuta iyam visrishtihi. This very statement we come across in the mandalas, Rigveda, Nasadiya. Yo asyadhyaksha parame vyoman so anga veda yadivana veda. Even that guiding consciousness, whether that also can understand this subtlety of origin of this wonderful world, this is again questionable. That is how the Vedic Rishis have this type of statements everywhere. But all different schools, even the Vedas, Samhitas, Brahmana, Aranyaka and Upanishads, there we see that quest for unearthing this subtlety, mystery of the universe. So for me, Kathopanishad is the main reference Akara Grantha for yoga. What is there about cosmology? That is what I have to ponder over. Here I have to present that. Yoga is not that yoga, it's just limited to some popular granthas, but for me, all 10 mandalas of Rigveda, they are the source books for yoga, with special reference to Kathopanishad, that is Atma Yoga. Because Rishi proclaims it. Adhyatma yoganugamena devam matva dhiro harsha shokau jahati. Adhyatma Yoga. Adhyatma Yoga got all these very wider areas to address. Otherwise, if you take this popular yoga, it is only now it has become so much physical. No, it is Vedantic, so this yoga, what I am projecting, it is spiritually rooted. There, cosmological hints are projected like that. So, Kathopanishad tells, that is a dialogue between Yama and Nachiketas. Nachiketas got wonderful young mind, so he represents a so-called modern young minds also. That is why he got so many questions. He wants to unearth the reality. He wants to unfold the mystery of this universe. So he got that question. Anyatra dharmad, anyatra adharmad, anyatra asmat krita kritat, anyatra bhutachya bhavitya bhavyachya, yes tadvad. Which is beyond time, which is beyond place, which is beyond everything. What is that? If I know that one, then I can understand what is the root cause for this wonderful universe. That is what his submission. Young mind submission. Answer is like that. Indriyebhya parahyartha arthebhyascha param manaha manasastu para buddhi buddhe atma mahan paraha manasah param avyaktam avyaktat purushah paraha purushat na parang kinchit sakashtha sa paragati. That is how this unearthing process goes from gross to subtle, gross to subtlest. That is consciousness. Consciousness is the root. The same reality, it is projected in different language. Chandogya says it is Sat, Sat, Sat. And some other Upanishads say it is Chit, Chit. And Taittiriya Upanishad says it is Ananda. But it is Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sadeva Somedam Agrashi Ekam Eva Advitiyam. Ekam Eva Advitiyam, that non-dualistic one, that is the root cause for this wonderful universe. That is what Aruni, that is dialogue between Aruni and Shvetaketu in the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, that is what it says. So, in all these contexts, we arrive at some conclusion that it is very, very mysterious, but in the same time, it is beyond mind, beyond time and space. Okay, but it is there. It is Sat. It is not so shunya, it is not so much it is wired or something, what we say. And words are different. Actually shunya, that very word also, it is not something which just leads to nihilism. That is where many times interpretation goes somewhere, it is beyond that one. But nihilism or all these words, different words are used, that is why confusions are created. But it is addressing to the same Satchidananda. That is the root cause for this wonderful world. That is where all Upanishads come together. It is not only Upanishads come together, all different schools of thoughts also. That is what great Kashmir Advaiti says, Tirthakriya vyasanena somanishikabhihi utpreksha tattvamid yad ami vadanti tat tattvameva ekamasti. Samvijnasu kevalamayam vidusham vivada. Only terminologies differ, but the concept is one and the same. That is what great Shiva Advaiti, our great scholar from Shiva Advaiti, he tells. So, it is only words are different. So, in that context, it is supraclinical consciousness. So, supraclinical word, it is to be properly understood, because now we all great scientists are here. When we start unearthing the reality, it is difficult to go beyond mind and our buddhi. It binds, that is the binding factor. That is why we so-called modern scientists, we limit to this so-called clinical analysis. This clinical analysis based probing and probing, it has its own limitations. That we have to understand first of all. Now, scientific fraternity is coming to that level. With all humbleness, all great scholars, they come to that one. So that I remember, there were 13 scholars sitting and 13 scientists sitting. We were in the 1989 in Shankara Matha, where all great scientists were there, coming from different states. One great scientist, visiting professor to this institute, and he told, we have many grassroots level understanding, like our tongue, it has its own function. Our ear, it has its own function. This is called perception. But we know that tongue has its center at brain level. That brain also, it is very much dependent of some other illuminating factor. What is that? Again we go on searching and searching. Beyond tongue, again brain. Beyond brain, again we go to mind. Beyond mind, that is what is something we call it soul. Beyond soul, that is what is that? Ultimately we arrive at consciousness, which is not clinically proved, not possible clinically now. Right now our science has not developed that level. That is why it is supraclinical, but it is consciousness. So in this particular theory of cosmology, different schools of thought, Jainism, Buddhism, all other schools of thoughts also come together. That is what Saujnasa Kemalamayam Vidusna, only different terminologies, words are used, but conceptually they are one and the same. So there we have to arrive at that conclusion, so that it is Upanishadic yogic concept of cosmology, that is Purushanna parankinchit sa kashtha sa paragati. Kashtha is the ultimate climaxical thing, that is the reality. That reality we call it sometimes Shunya, sometimes Sachidananda, sometimes Shiva or Vishnu. So many different terminologies they followed, used by different schools of thoughts. But that is where we have to end there. And in the sense, it is only again start of our journey. There again we must start, because Nayayika say like that, how it is, how we go, one after one, how we go. Atma manasa sanyusyate, manaha indriyena, indriyam arthena. Subjective things we take up later on. First we go to objectivity. From objectivity our journey starts. Then it ends at subjectivity. So indriya, then artha, manaha, then buddhi, then where we end again, it is consciousness, atma. In Nayayika schools of cosmology also arrive at that conclusion. So my submission is to think more and more about consciousness, and more research it is needed to be there. There is so much vast area where we have so many unanswered questions again. Yadyapi Upanishads are there to answer questions, but Upanishads again, they are Upanishads. The very meaning of Upanishads it is secret and sacred knowledge. It is. That is why this unearthing process, probing must start. I think this type of symposium will give that type of impetus for next journey. That is my humble submission.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is the end of the first issue, but we are running ahead of time, and now 15 minutes tea or coffee break. So let us go and take tea or coffee.